Uh, Thank you all for coming too. I really appreciate it. It's good to be back home in California for a few days. So yeah, let's get some poems. This first one's called "The Thepachucos' Grandson Considers Skipping School." I didn't want to be bad, but I wanted to be bad. Yesterday, someone threw a book at the sub's head. All I saw was a bird with paged wings. And today, when I walked into class baggy-jeaned, he took roll but didn't call my name. That's how I knew I didn't have to answer no more. I became absence in my seat, asleep, became block letters for the name my homie bestowed. I dreamt chain links and angel wings, how to escape. At some point, we were awake. Yes, all the brown boys like me, and we carved our new names into the desks in the shape of hearts. What a beautiful beating. We cut the tongues from our old shoes to stuff into new ones later, so they'd pop like a bullfrog puffs when it's in danger. No one to recognize us. We were more mustached than our mothers could manage. Before fifth period, some left. Through a window, my homies clicked chins, "What's up?" for me to come through. "Don't let the wind between the branches fool you," their eyes said. Every looking out also implies enclosure. Out there, where I could be anything, I placed a silver chain around my neck, and it fit like a slipped halo. Thank you. So a lot of the first collection that it's pretty much done now, is I'm just like tightening it up. It revolves around identity and growing up in California and like masculinity. That's what kind of arose when I got really into working on the manuscript. So a lot of that's in here. Learning to box. Summer called for it. Miguel said to his brothers, "What are you little bitches waiting for?" Tossing the gloves onto the front lawn. In 8th grade, what Miguel had I wanted. Girls hovering close like kids to a lit Christmas tree. The ability to bloody a boy in one swing. The yard became a ring, no bell or timer. Just us and his brothers yanking the gloves up their skinny brown arms, lacing them tight with their teeth, talking shit between knots. Calling each other putos like hawking loogies until our mothers called us in to eat. Juan was 10, Brian 2 years younger, and not a good listener. You know how it goes. Brian swings like a carnival ride. Miguel yells, "Keep your hands up," and "You better not cry." That summer, I learned men are born from torn muscle tees, sharp teeth, and pink scars on smooth faces. There, motor oil combed over the lawn, bud cans crunched sunlight into silver blades, and sweat slipped along foreheads like commas between every other word those boys, desperate to leave kiddom, spat out. We didn't want to stop. Years later, Miguel would go to juvie for breaking another boy's jaw. Police photos of his knuckles and all his homies proud. Brown boys of July, bobbing, blocking from getting bombed on, swift with a sharp jab. No one told us we moved with such grace, or that passion didn't have to be violent. Then, a long arm threw a target in the air. Brian on his back, Brian on his back, rising before Miguel got there first. I thought I could be tough enough too. Transfer that somehow into a confidence for the girls of high school Spanish class who knew only the answers to last night's homework. Once, after helping him in with groceries, Miguel told me how, at Food for Less, a condom slipped from his father's wallet at the checkout line, that his father winked at the cute cashier when he picked it up and said to his son, "'Cause you never know." Miguel laughed, and I couldn't tell if he meant it. What choice did I have then but to wring laughter through my throat? That summer, I learned laughter is a type of leaving. Maybe that's not what we wanted. But if our mothers called us in for dinner, we stopped hearing them. The lights came on around us, inside each house on our block, and we just stayed there, laughing, shouting, and swinging at the swelling eye of the evening, closing it for good. Not even our fathers, who approached the doorway to stare with their arms crossed but said nothing. Not even they could get us to come back in. Thank you. So this next poem, usually, I think I've only read it once, and I don't think I usually like to introduce it, but I was at this writing retreat where the lecturer was Patricia Smith, and she talked about how she wrote poems about family members that had been incarcerated, and she had never liked to talk about it, but she wrote poems about it, and so that kind of made me want to revisit the poem and read it out to you all today. My brother is asking for stamps and photos of me and my new wife. He's asking for pictures from the wedding. He's very sorry he couldn't make it. He can't wait to meet her. My brother is asking if I can call a warehouse office in Santa Fe and tell them Ray, his celly, is fine and that Ray would like his old job back one day, if possible. My brother is asking for paper, asking for postage stamps and a few dollars on his J-Pay. It's June, it's July. He says it's not so bad in here. He says he's not getting institutionalized, won't get institutionalized, not like the others. He has TV. He reads a lot. My brother is asking for book 5, 6, or 12 of the Women's Murder Club series. It's May, it's March, it's May, it's October. Happy Halloween, brother. He's asking again for postage stamps, telling me he might be programmed, sure, but who isn't? We all need routine. He says that one time after chow, they let the guys stay out a little longer, and the guys looked at each other like, why aren't we being locked down yet? My brother says he's a confused mouse sometimes. Sometimes he won't go out for rec, can't stand the fact that it's going to end. It's June, it's July. Happy birthday, brother. My brother is asking for stamps. He's ending every letter with a cartoon of himself all homeboyed out, even though he wasn't like that before. It's like he's grown an extra life in there, and the him I grew up with is closed until not this August. I know I shouldn't imagine him this way, but I will always be younger and looking up. That's my brother. He's asking for stamps. Outside, the leaves have turned without notice. It's the week when every walnut seems to be falling from the sky, and every time I drive home, I run as many over as possible. It's June. Happy birthday. It's November. My brother says he'll write when he can. He knows I'm busy. Everyone's busy. It's August, and he's looking for stamps. I totally brought my phone up here like I was gonna take a timer of myself. I don't know how long I've been, 10 minutes or something has it been? Okay, thank you. All right. So I have a little funny story. I don't know if you remember, Chris. I was so I did my undergrad at UC Riverside, and I remember Chris was probably the first professor that challenged me in ways where, when you start writing poetry, or when you start writing, you really, as passionate as you are for it, I feel like there has to be someone that kind of breaks you away from your ego. And so I remember coming into class one day, and independently I came up with this phrase. I was like, oh, it was in my poems, the sound of silence. And Buckley was like, I think Simon and Garfunkel already took that, they got it covered. But ever since then, from those classes, I've been working with trying to ground images, and then of course, I went on to do my MFA, and so I like to try to keep the poems tethered and grounded in a concrete image, but I also like to kind of just play with narrative, manipulate narrative, repetition and echoes of images, and so I won't look at you when I'm reading this poem, but I had a lot of fun writing it. I need to drink some water.
Get your great book out, Chris.
Yeah, The Purple Pen. It's called Parade. I wanted to write a poem with horses galloping through it, but I don't know much about horses anymore, except for that they do gallop, although this simple fact probably came to me in a movie I fell asleep watching. Don't be mad. I've started this poem so many times, once by asking the internet, where do horses come from? My grandfather's neighbor owned a ranch, so as a boy I'd watch through a wire fence as horses shook their manes and pranced in circles. Perhaps that part about prancing is not true. I trust my imagination more than I should, at least enough to end this poem with a charge of horses departing in a cloud of dust, or however it is they vanish, because they do. The truth is, my friend was the one who loved horses, and to be completely honest, I was in love with her. This was years ago. We were in college. Isn't that a good way to begin a love story? How would you do it? Make sure there's grass to lie on after class, an alder tree and sunlight climbing down it, afternoons and a campus slowly emptying. Please provide a moment where they tell each other, finally, about their dreams. Yes, that cliche bit every writer learns to run from. Maybe all you need to know is that I wanted us to work out long after it didn't. I know this poet who hates when poets use the word love in their poems. She'll turn the page on the word. I've seen her do it. I wonder about what word she places there instead. Earlier today, a horse stood still next to a fence as if the music inside it wouldn't play. There were no flies circling her ears, no breeze to bring the smell of what I thought was late spring. This is how I knew I could no longer stare at the painting. All the clouds had been brushed away with blue. The morning I left home for good, I watched my father through the window as he stood by my truck with a line of rope to hold down the boxes of everything I owned. Careful knots. There are no horses here, and my friend, a woman I love, does not show up to say goodbye. I was listening to this podcast the other day where a poet explained the difficulty of writing love poems. The problem is, he said, there's no tension in the love I have for my wife. In my headphones, I heard the interviewer exhale and recognized the ache it floated from. It was a horse galloping over a hill. Then there was a pause. The poet spoke about how he might never write a love poem again if all goes well. I laughed in my kitchen. I had been washing dishes. My wife was getting ready for work. Another pause. In the background, the clink of silverware. They were at a restaurant, and I could not distinguish a fork from a spoon, and that bothered me. I listened for a busboy, a clatter of neighboring tables. Sounds of metal washed the interview. The poet's words slipped into whisper. Isn't it like that? A shift of attention the heart asks for. The poet I know would hate this poem. I think I hate this poem. The horses I promised aren't nodding in the tall grass. There is no rider to take them into the sunset, if that's what's supposed to happen. Is that what's supposed to happen? I want someone to tell me how to stop an ache as it rings through the body, as it grows heavy in the bones and wraps your chest silver. So as was mentioned, I grew up, born and raised in Pomona, California. So it's about 2 to 5 hours the other way, depending on traffic. And I wrote this poem. I think it was like my first spring break back from my first semester back after after my first semester in Minnesota. My hometown is a man riding a bicycle with no chain. His legs a too quick clock, too easy in showing how any time away from home is too long. Pomona becomes a man asking if I want to buy his MP3 player. He raises headphones to my face. Listen, he says. No one believes him. But he doesn't say about what. It's how they say yes, but don't look. I nod. He talks about his daughter, who works at AutoZone, who's the manager now, the jefe. But his son, who I'm certain I went to school with, who walked into 5th grade one morning with shaved eyebrows and sat down without saying a word, who never spoke to anyone ever again, he does not mention, not even once. Where have all my classmates gone? Where I grew up has nowhere to live, but he says he'll be all right. He'll be all right. He'll be all right because the lady from the next block over owes him for mowing her lawn. And have I seen a Bible around? No one's going to pick it up, he says, not unless it had $100 in it. Wouldn't that be something? He's nodding. He's balancing himself on the bike. He's trying to leave, but will I be here tomorrow? He might be around. My town's always around. So how about that MP3 player? I can keep it if I want. No, how about for $10? My town is presenting its callous palm. Now my town relentless, pedaling like everything is all right, like everything is all right, like a Ferris wheel no one's going to ride. Look at it spin through the evening, each basket scooping sunlight, then shadow. The carnival worker we turn away from calls for us and keeps calling. long after he knows we're gone. Thank you. All right, let's see. Two poems left. So this is the one that some of y'all saw. And so I've been teaching at the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, or with them for the past 2 years. So once a week for about 15 weeks, I go in and teach a room full of men about poetry, and we do workshops, and it's beautiful. From my classroom window at the prison before students arrive. Because the blinds stay open, I see birds. I watch how men watch those birds. They monitor flight paths and a soaring appetite for the crumbs they shouldn't have pocketed from chow. The indifferent birds ask for nothing, yearn for nothing, except perhaps the sky, which is nothing to them but magnetic blue wind, their one great war of journey. I've been thinking about mine lately. My own great war. Once I met a man who'd been waiting hours for a storm to hit. At the park, he told me how difficult flight is for birds. He stared at the humming sky and disappeared. Later that night, I could not fall asleep, not with a fact like that. Instead, I sat at my coffee table and fed a dying rubber fig tree filtered water and the eggshells I broke apart, calling them my little countries. I thought of being president. Then I said to myself, why can't I be a king? When I arrived at the idea of God, I began to float. When I woke, I understood my only burden is the simple life of a man who can go home and think and care for plants that do not know he is their father. If I am no one to these leaves, to whom do I belong? Thus, my great war is with myself, a wingspan of stirring thoughts that ask what's next, that wait for my response, like the men beyond this window. Breadcrumbs, tiny questions for birds. Each man tossing a piece at the air anticipates a swooping answer, tries not to think of what goes uneaten, of what falls towards death, wet and certain. That patch of grass they walk, its cold blades. It's late October, every step stiff and speechless. All right, last poem. Thank you all again for coming out. I do not have a book published to sell you in between a break, but if you have questions or want to talk to me, I'd love to meet y'all. This one is probably the most recent poem that'll go in the first collection that I'm working on, and it, oddly enough, I have it in the earlier part of the manuscript, but we'll see if I already start scratching out lines, but we'll see. Doing donuts in an 87 Mustang 5.0 after my homie Chris gets broken up with. I want to argue for the stars, but I find them missing through this window splattered with mud. Tonight, I sit shoddy and do not ask Chris if he's okay. This is the kind of loyalty I know. How the Mustang makes eights across the soccer field. I run my hand over pennies Pepsi'd to the center console. Yesenia's photo blocks the speedometer, and the next few years of Chris's life have already begun to take shape. I pluck pennies into my palm. It takes a while for this story to burn through an entire field, but then a safety belt shocks my collar. Chris turns and aims for a gate without letting go of the gas. I yell, "Fuck it," to whatever I can't hear him say. And isn't that why I'm here? I watch the chain link swell in the headlights. I disappear the pennies with my fist. Thank you all.